Shirley, we're down to part one. You ready?
I'm ready.
And so our very first thing we're going to talk about is program concept and the choices around that.
I know that a lot of you have already begun because I kept hearing from you.
Yeah.
However, I'm going to start out with my favorite mantra and say to you, the single most important thing you will do is choose your soundtrack. And let me explain why. The soundtrack will guide the dance. It will lead you as your blueprint for your layout of your design. It will contour and shape the show with highs and lows. You know how judges will say no impact here or whatever?
Yep.
That's what they're talking about. It happens in the music. If you pick something that is designed to put people to sleep, that's what your audience will do. And therein lies the big question as you make this selection. How do you want the audience to react at the end of your show? What do you want them to feel? Mm-hmm. And the judges are audience.
Sure.
And so, that applies to them too. So
your likelihood of creating honest-to-God dynamics and not just random acts of color guard, given a great piece of music, your odds of creating all those good things are much higher. Sometimes a great piece of music will cover up some inadequacies where maybe you don't provide the dynamic range, but your music may have it and sometimes implies. And I don't see it a lot, but I do see it sometimes.
I think you're right.
You can certainly recover with a great piece of music easier than you could with a bad one.
Absolutely right. And so please don't overlook that. It's the single greatest thing that you will do.
Absolutely.
And then, there's a few things that I'd like to suggest you might want to avoid. Let's not delve into the political scene. Let's avoid having subjects that are going to be making people feel depressed, angry, frustrated at the end of your show. Remember that you've got kids that are, except for the independent world guards, who are older. You've got kids who haven't experienced life.
Right.
So what you ask them to portray has to be something they can get into and relate to.
There's a built-in lack of authenticity when you're projecting something you feel as a designer is more important than the life experience of the performers allows. And some of those subjects, and we're in a political year, so of course all of this is all at the front of everybody's brain. And it's also been a particularly kind of a tragic year. There's been a lot of fodder for things that make you, that create an emotional response. But where I would caution you is that there's certain subjects that have such gravity that when you try to, have people communicate that subject without having the life experience, you ultimately diminish the subject. So if you truly feel that subject is important, then maybe this is not the best way to kind of illustrate that.
That's absolutely
and it kind
true.
of cheapens it, and I will tell you, sometimes it feels like a bit of pandering. Sometimes, too, when you see this kind of plastic palm tree approach to something that really has true gravity. And even in the independent worlds, I would ask them to think really long and hard about whether this comes from your world or if you just are kind of treating it like an easy way into the psyche of the times.
I know that if I were producing a color guard tomorrow, which I would love to be able to do, I would want the audience on their feet, excited because I had given them an e-ticket ride.
Absolutely.
And I would not lull them to sleep. They would not be allowed to take a breath. They would just be so filled with the excitement of the moment and the charm and the delightfulness of the character.
Yeah, if you look at those crowd favorites, the fan favorites that they vote on the night of finals and stuff, look at every one of those and you're going to find exactly what you're talking about.
Keeping in mind, what your whole long-term range is, what your capabilities are, assessing what your staff is going to be able to bring to you, having a clear plan to give to your staff.
Yep.
I mean, that's part and parcel of you've got this thing going, and then are you the person doing the staging? Are you the person designing the vocabulary, etc.? You have to be clear and deal with those people so that they can do their job.
Absolutely. Ultimately, all of those things support a singular vision. It has to come from a single place and not necessarily a collective. And that's where we also talk about kind of stylist identity and signature. What is it that the color guard's known for, and what is it you feel like is your biggest asset as a designer, choreographer, and what is it you think you did well, and what is, kind of your fingerprint on the activity. And I think that your worksheet is going to address a lot of that.
I think that's important, Carl, because in throughout this thing, I've asked them, what prompts you to do what you do? Is it the trends of the activity? Is it what's getting the points? Is it who's currently beating me at the local level? And, there's all of those things happen, and they're all valid.
I think it's good to have a good overview of where the activity is headed in each class. They're not all parallels exactly,
No.
but you definitely see a forward progression creatively in all classes. And I think once you get to finals, you see the people that are at the tops of those classes, and even all of the finalists. There's such a range available. I loved watching the Scholastic A's last year, all 24 of them, because they really were 24 separate crown jewels. And you asked me earlier when we would sit down with the old Odyssey and Fantasia projects, how I would kind of think about that. And I'd be hyper aware of where I felt like the activity was going. I would also be hyper aware of what I thought I did well. I played violin and trumpet, so the music was the basis for me. Making sure that I picked a great piece of music that had a ton of depth, that had a lot available, so that my choices weren't dictated by simply interpreting, but that I had ways to elevate the music through the visual choice.
Good
But
point.
making sure that you had music that lent itself to that kind of ability. But then obviously you have to look at the performers and know what they're capable of, and also what resonates with them. We were talking about that in terms of theme, as far as like when we were cautioning you a minute ago. But also they also have their strengths. They have the things that their own propensities, and if you can exploit those, you're automatically going to find a great performance. Also,
All kids are born knowing how to play act
Yep.
and dramatize, capitalize on that.
Well,
And you know what? Sometimes you think in terms of a 3 or so year increment.
Sure.
You say, I'm going to do this year and with this in mind for next year and so forth. And that's not a bad thing at all.
It's never a bad thing. And I tell instructors that, in our world, we're kind of transient. People will move into certain gigs at different times, or they'll have relationships with band directors that they're really close to and they think they've worked really well together. Is that it's not until year 3 that you really come through and the product really looks like you. So having that year 1 and 2, understanding that you have built-in compromise, I think only helps you get to that year 3. And then by year 3, you really have created your own stylistic identity.
Sure have.
And those performers then look like you. It's your product.
That's right.
That's
right.
So allow that process to happen.
And do it through your programming.
Facilitate.
Some of the greatest color guards that I can recall have redefined themselves every year. But in the act of redefining themselves, there is a core aspect that is their signature, their blueprint.
Absolutely.
They'll say, oh, well, I know this is done by so-and-so because the staging is so great. Or look at the equipment handling or whatever. And you can still redefine yourself and bring us something new.
Yes. And I think that because you grow as an artist progressively, it's not as though you do a project and then you decide to change directions 180 degrees. You definitely are still taking all the things you learn in your previous projects and then applying them to what you do next.
Absolutely.
And next and next.
Absolutely.
I think this tool is going to be really good for that. I think programmatically you have to do the same thing.
You certainly do. And call if you have any questions.
Your next steps in this project are simple. Start with a review of your work from last season by simply finding a video that represents your work at its most complete best. Then watch the video simply to get it back into the front of your brain. Then print out Shirley's worksheet that you'll find in her most recent memo. With the video available for multiple viewings and to isolate events, start by simply responding to Shirley's questions. It's as easy as that. You can certainly answer her questions in your head, but grading yourself and making notes for each point will help you keep account of your reflections and create markers for improvement. Remember, you're the only one to see your work and understand your own assessment. This study shouldn't feel like a job or homework. It's simply intended to be a tool for those that are passionate about their work and love the creative, competitive process. This tool is perfect for those who simply want to be better students of their craft. Don't hesitate to reach out for clarification or comment. All right, good luck.